To our presentation on teacher tenure. To begin, we're going to discuss a little bit about what teacher tenure is and how it came about. It actually first started getting fought for back in the late 19th century when all American workers were fighting for fair working conditions. Teachers were fighting for protection against parents and administrators who were trying to dictate lesson plans and exclude controversial materials like Huck Finn from their reading list. So New Jersey was the first state to actually approve teacher tenure laws, and that was back in 1910, far before unions became as powerful as we know them today. And oftentimes people will see it as being the ideal teaching position because you have academic freedom and job security, and you have it all in a union contract, which means you have union support behind you. There are millions of teachers in the United States that have tenure, and the hiring and firing procedures are dictated to administration because of these laws. These are going to be the guiding questions that we'll go throughout this presentation. I'll first cover the contention regarding teacher tenure, as well as how views differ depending on what your role is in education. Anthony's going to cover the remaining of the questions in the second part of our video. So first, what is the contention regarding teacher tenure? Because there's been a really large push recently to end these laws. It's being blamed for a lot of the ails in education today. And one of the larger pushers behind that is the organization called Student Matter, who's funding the litigation process to deem teacher tenure unconstitutional. They're also going after the current dismissal procedures as well as seniority rules, which both closely relate to teacher tenure. They claim that these laws protect less effective teachers and get rid of young or new teachers because they're not yet protected by teacher tenure. And that those who are protected by teacher tenure, if they're underperforming to the point where they would normally get fired, instead of going through this long, cumbersome process to fire them, they're simply shift off to a different school in what Arnold Schwarzenegger started to call the dance of the lemons, where poor teachers just kept getting shifted around. Students Matter argue that this disproportionately harms poor and minority schools because they're often where the teachers get sent. And they basically claim that these laws are violating students, especially poor and minority students, rights to education and to a good quality education. Now, teacher tenure was originally attempted to get struck down under Proposition 74 in 2005, but Californian voters actually voted to keep tenure laws in place. So Student Matters continued to pursue deeming teacher tenure unconstitutional. The one component they definitely have an issue with is the dismissal process, how lengthy, costly, and burdensome it is. As you see by this chart, there's long waiting periods, there's lots of hearings and appeals to those hearings and appeals in the court system. And all of this takes a lot of time and it costs a lot of money, which is why many people say these teachers end up getting shifted around instead. To hear a little bit more about this case, Vergara v. State of California, let's listen in.
Closing arguments were held this morning in a case that could change how public school teachers are hired and fired in California. The plaintiffs in Vergara v. California say poor students are harmed by current tenure laws, which replace new teachers in low-income neighborhoods with bad teachers that have seniority. Joshua Pichault, president of the California Federation of Teachers, disagrees.
There are other reasons that shape what happened in school, like funding, like poverty in the community, lack of resources.
Pichault says tenure is a tool that empowers teachers.
Seniority gives us an objective criteria that says this is not going to be subject to cronyism and favoritism, but it's an objective way of seeing who should stay and who should go. But
tenure violates the students the right to a good education. So now similar cases are planned nationwide. The teachers union is working on an appeal, and many are wondering, is this the end of the powerful teachers unions altogether? Let's get the take of Michelle Rhee. You remember, she's the former D.C. Public Schools Chancellor, now the founder and CEO of Students First. Michelle Rhee, good to have you on New Day. You were known for shaking it up in D.C. You were seen as really going in there. We may remember the famous/infamous video of you having to fire a principal. Now, how do you see this decision?
Well, this is a huge victory, not just for the 9 plaintiffs who brought the case forward, but for kids across the country, because it means fundamentally that they now have a right to get a really high quality, excellent education, and that they have the right to be taught by a highly effective teacher every day.
The pushback is tenure's not the problem, it's the solution to keeping qualified teachers in positions when they otherwise may not. It rewards those who do their job well. You're taking that away, making it harder to keep good teachers. Your response?
Well, though that may have been the original intention of tenure, that's not actually how tenure plays out in our public schools today. It has essentially become a job protection for life regardless of performance. And what this judge is saying is that that's absolutely unacceptable, that we have to take into consideration teacher quality every day when we're making decisions about who's in front of our kids.
But it's so hard now. People are so litigious. Principals are mercurial. Everything's so political. Teachers need protection from that system. So if they want to be bold, if they want to challenge the status quo and hold kids and parents accountable, they need the protection of tenure. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that teachers absolutely need protections, and there should be due process in place. But again, the way that tenure has played out is that it's protecting ineffective teachers who are in the classroom, and even effective teachers would agree that that absolutely shouldn't be the case.
Though it was deemed unconstitutional and our education secretary celebrated that ruling, calling it a mandate to solve these problems. This is a case that, as I said, is in the appeals process, so no changes are being made yet. Student Matters argues that teachers' job security should be based on the test scores of their students, constant observation, and feedback for teachers. In the ruling, the judge used the terms grossly ineffective and incompetent nearly 20 times to describe teachers and used no other adjectives when referencing teachers. A 1 in 125,000 chance each year of being fired for incompetence. In this respect, as this quote shows us, teachers' jobs are 3,750,000 times more secure than those of private sector workers. However, we can also look to the fact that 50% of all beginner teachers who choose to leave the profession do so within 5 years. So some may argue that that is the underqualified teachers weeding themselves out or being encouraged to leave within the first short period of time. Also, if we look back to 2007, which was the last time national data like this was made available, yes, only 2.1% of American public school teachers were fired for cause, and that includes tenured teachers. But when we compare that to federal workers, they were fired at an annual rate of 0.02%, which means that public school teachers are exponentially more likely to be terminated than other federal workers. It is the teachers' unions that came to support these laws in the case that we just discussed, and they're going to continue to do so. So let's talk a little bit more about how the views of teacher tenure differ depending on what your role is in education. It's interesting to look at the way teachers are viewed in different countries. In South Korea, they're referred to as the nation builders. And in a survey in Finland, both men and women named teachers to be among the top 3 most desirable profession for a spouse. However, in America, we have the quote, "those who can't do teach." And the question may be presented if that is why teachers seem to be particularly under attack within this Vergara case. A teacher actually cites this as being an issue, calling the education profession basically a two-party system where teachers and administrators are on opposing sides. And in the Vergara trial, teachers alone took the rap for incompetence, completely ignoring the role that administrators take in making education effective for their students. Teachers argue that teacher tenure is in place to fight against wrongful employment and favoritism. Administrators, however, think that they need more time to make these decisions. They need more time to decide whether a teacher is worthy of teacher tenure, and they're unhappy with the fact that personal connection in hiring and firing is essentially removed because the tenure laws make it so formulaic um, as far as the process that they have to follow. In a poll that was recently taken, polling 1,504 voters in California, parents seem to, in large part, agree with the perspective of student matters, mostly saying that it's pretty important for it to be easier to fire underperforming teachers, as well as claiming that the base teacher pay should be based on a range of measures, including student achievement, classroom observation, and parent feedback. Notice that seniority and degrees ascertained are not on that list. Parents also largely believe that student progress on test and achievement should be important factors. However, the majority of them also felt that teachers were underpaid and that more resources should be invested in traditional public education. They also place teachers as being the highest on the list of who they trust to know what's best for their students. They put teachers oftentimes above themselves, far above teacher unions, with Governor Jerry Brown, administrators, and philanthropists being way down on the list of who they trust to control education. So what do you think about these issues? If you want to take a moment to pause this video, we'd like you to say on a scale of 1 to 5 how much you agree with the following statements, with 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. Please pause now. We asked these same questions of a couple of different teachers in our network. And on the following chart, you'll see what type of school these teachers were at, what their current contractual situation was, and how much they agreed or disagreed with the following statements. I think it's notable that the majority of them agreed that teacher tenure either has or would allow them more creativity, and that they in large part disagree that the only impact is job security. Most of them seemed pretty neutral on the impact teacher tenure has on how seriously teachers take their jobs, and many of them strongly agreed that teacher tenure allows bad teachers to keep teaching. And that's a primary issue of why teacher tenure got caught up in litigation to begin with. They seem to be pretty split on whether a good principal should be able to gauge a teacher's quality in their first 2 years of teaching. Anthony's going to talk a little bit more about that in a following guiding question. And overall, some of them were mostly neutral about whether teacher tenure actually benefits our education system.